Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Our first Writers on the Rise reading. This spotlight reading series strives to uplift diverse and rising voices. Thanks to the Rana Jaffe Foundation for sponsoring this reading series. Our rising writer reading tonight is Kosiso Ugwueze, and I'm so excited to introduce her and to have her share her work with us tonight. Kosiso Ugwueze is a fiction writer and editor. She was born in Nigeria, but grew up in Southern California. Her short stories have appeared in Gulf Coast, Subtropics, and the South Carolina Review, among others. Kosiso is the recipient of residencies and fellowships from Kimbilio, Oxbow School of Art, and the Vermont Studio Center, where I met her when she was a resident here at VSC in January 2020. She lives in Los Angeles, and she is in an MFA program at Johns Hopkins University. I would like to turn it over now to our wonderful reader and fiction writer, Kosiso. Go ahead. The mic is yours.
Thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate this. Just want to say shout out to my mom who's here and my brother and Jean, hi. Just thank you all for being here. I'm going to be reading a short story that was recently published. It's called Frontier, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Frontier. Dr. Nonsomudi has only a few minutes to finish his lunch. He's in the break room at a small plastic table with a small plastic chair. There are narrow cabinets on the lime green walls, a vending machine near the television, and a few motivational posters near the windows. In the ceiling-high windows, the desert mountains loom in the distance. The sky is slightly overcast, and the earth is dry and expansive. He imagines the wind outside, a gusty wind. It'll blow a thick layer of dust from the mountaintops. The dust will float to the ground slowly, and he will find a small film of it on the windshield when he returns to his car at nightfall. From the window, Dr. Moody traces the large simmering desert, expansiveness unlike anything he has ever known. When he was a small child in Enugu, banana shrubs and wild grass owned every space of land that hadn't already been colonized by buildings. But when he first arrived in America as a teenager, the first thing Dr. Moody noticed was that emptiness is allowed, that the vast landscape encourages it. And so he watches the desert from his perch on the small hospital's 5th floor. The view is both familiar and unfamiliar. And though he has been at this window almost every day for 1 year, this first year of his medical residency, the emptiness is still startling. The plastic table creaks as Dr. Moody settles into it. He unfolds his lunch bag hastily. He has 20 minutes for lunch today, more than he has had in months. Immediately, the smell of rice and beans, of goat meat, rises to the ceiling and fills the room. Dr. Moody peers down at his plate. Frowning, he returns his gaze to his now empty lunchbox. He has forgotten his plantains on the kitchen counter, right next to the microwave where he had emptied them into a small glass container with an orange top. But there is no time to lament this small tragedy. Although Dr. Moody loves plantains with the same level of passion that he loves children, plantains are only a side dish in this meal, an added bonus. Dr. Moody shakes his head and picks up his fork. He pulls his chair closer to the table. He has been distracted lately, he acknowledges to himself. It is not the environment exactly, though that plays a part in his feelings of isolation. This southwestern edge of the country is the exact opposite of his American home in Maryland, where his father works tirelessly as if there are more children to support. And that's the other issue Dr. Moody muses, being the only child of 2 headstrong parents, the only male child of the rare Nigerian divorce. But his mother wanted him to have an American education and American opportunities. She wanted him to travel the world with confidence and bravado, in the same way the other Bintus in Nigeria stomped around the country. So when he was 14, she sent him to live with the philandering ex-husband she had once threatened with a butcher knife. It had been a difficult decision for her, Dr. Moody knows. He was sure his mother was the most prideful woman in all of Nigeria, a nation full of the proudest people on the planet. But in her tear-soaked face that last night in Abuja, Dr. Moody saw that unmistakable glimmer of hope, that pool of possibility that uproots people from soil of motherland to far-flung corners over unknown waters. In the quiet lounge, Dr. Moody starts first with his goat meat, and he can already hear his mother's deep voice. Boys who eat their meat first will learn to steal. He chuckles a little and closes his eyes as he chews, his mother's voice instantly comforting. It always surprises him the soothing effect that her voice or the thought of her voice can bring to him, regardless of the emotion it conveys, whether it be anger, which was uncommon, or patience, which was most common. Dr. Moody thinks briefly of the paradox that is his mother, a woman both soft and hard, both reasonable and unreasonable. She is a woman of grand gestures. She cannot be told to sit here or stand there, but she is also a woman deeply concerned about her image. And even though she has always done as she pleases, the question of her reputation is something that Dr. Moody knows preoccupies her. The air conditioning's moist air tickles Dr. Moody's neck as he takes a second bite from his plate. In his mouth, the rice is soft, the goat meat tender and delectable. He savors the basil he has added in the stew, the extra peppers that would make his Indian friends pause, but would certainly kill a white man. Dr. Moody takes a sip from his cup and dabs the ends of his mouth with a napkin, making sure that there is no trace of debris on his white lab coat, on his pristine blue shirt. But as always, there is something missing in his stew, in his life, something he cannot quite name. The creaking door interrupts him as another young doctor comes in. Dr. Pete Montgomery, red-faced with thick blonde hair and a matching white coat. They exchange brief greetings. Dr. Montgomery plops a plate on the table and takes one of the plastic chairs. He turns on the television, and they sit in silence except for the changing voices on the screen. The stew is missing crayfish, Dr. Moody thinks. But it is also missing something else, something more important than an ingredient. He takes another bite and chews, this time quietly, staring at the television. Nothing interesting is on, just soap operas and basic cable. Beside him, Dr. Montgomery eats his ham sandwich and bag of chips noisily, flipping through the channels, his head red all the way down to his neck, his eyes soft. The table is so small that on opposing sides their knees touch briefly. They make eye contact, and Dr. Montgomery smiles slowly. His teeth are firm and white, his eyes a sea blue. "What you got there?" Dr. Montgomery asks in his slow southern drawl. Dr. Moody looks up. "Rice, beans, and stew," he says. "That's not what you had last week, is it?" Dr. Montgomery says. "It was some type of plantains and eggs, wasn't it?" "Plantains and egg stew," Dr. Moody says. He wipes the corners of his mouth with his napkin. "Awful lot of stews," Dr. Montgomery says, taking a bite of his sandwich. His hands are bone thin, his white coat too big for his narrow frame. But he is handsome in a boyish way, and Dr. Moody cannot help but admire the delicateness of his hands, a surgeon's type of hands. "They're easy to make," Dr. Moody says of his stews, watching as Dr. Montgomery wipes a smudge of mustard with the edge of his slender finger. "You just grind the ingredients in a blender and put them on the stove." Dr. Montgomery laughs. "I hear ya," he says. "There's only so much takeout a man can live on." The conversation dies there, and Dr. Moody returns his plates to his lunchbox. He looks at his watch. He has been gone for 22 minutes. He wipes the spot where he has eaten, gives Dr. Montgomery one last smile, and hurries from the room. He buys his goat meat from a Chinese store, his plantains and crayfish from a Mexican mercado. In this mercado, a few miles from his apartment, he also finds his ose, which they call habanero peppers, and his maggi, which they call bouillon. the tomatoes and basil he finds at the local supermarket. As Dr. Moody hurries to his car at the end of his shift, blurry-eyed but determined, he checks his watch. 11:30 p.m. The mercado will be open until midnight, and he will stop for some crayfish. In his few months on the internal medicine floor, he'll have time to sleep, time to cook, to swim in the pool behind the apartment complex, read a spy thriller in those lawn chairs. As he pulls away from the parking lot with his windows down, blasting Osadebe, Dr. Moody lets the desert breeze whip his face. He walks into the store accompanied by the chime of bells. The fluorescent lights are bright in the night, and Dr. Moody peruses the aisles, collecting a few additional things: Goya malt, plantain chips, Mexican candy. You'll always find a Mexican mercado anywhere, Dr. Moody thinks. You'll find one in the desert, the mountains, the Arctic pole at the ends of the earth. That and a Chinese restaurant. Enterprising like us Igbos, his father would say. You'll find people like us anywhere, carving out a living even in the most unforgiving places. As he crisscrosses the store, Dr. Moody can smell the sourness of his father's breath at his shoulder, the disappointment heavy in his words. He can feel his father's eyes on his hands as they shake over his last letter of rejection. 0 medical schools in the United States will take him. 10 years of tutors, community college classes, after-school programs, summer science academies, private university, all down the drain. I gave you everything, Dr. Moody can still hear his father say. I brought you to this country, this place of infinite possibilities, gave you everything in my power, all for you to seize the day, and yet you can't. Do you know what your mates are doing back home in Nigeria? Do you know that graduates are driving tankers and laying cement? There are many things Dr. Moody cannot find here in this desert heartland. He cannot find egusi, for example, or bono. He cannot find ugu leaves, fresh or dried. There is no okporoko, no periwinkle. He has gone a year without these foods, his most favorite of foods. Once he had driven the 100 miles up to Albuquerque, and he had stopped by a supermarket. He had walked from aisle to aisle buying his chicken, his beef, his fruits, and his vegetables. And as he had approached the vegetable aisle, he had spotted a surprise, nestled in the corner under fluorescent lighting, dripping with moisture from the sprinklers. He had found Nayara, the little egg-shaped vegetable from home, white with green stripes and tiny green stems. But at the supermarket, they were labeled Thai eggplant. As he held a small bunch in his hands, he had felt a delirious excitement, like he had won a prize. And when he walked to his car, there was an extra bounce in his step. And when he returned home, he had called his mother and relayed the news. I found Ayara, which they called Thai eggplant. When he returns home at 12:15 a.m., Dr. Moody calls his mother like he does every Tuesday. In his small living room, empty except for a sofa and a coffee table, he reclines on his sofa and fiddles with his framed pajama bottoms. His mother's ringtone is a loud gospel song about favor and blessings. Jesus is Lord and he will bless you, amen. Tap into his blessings. Prosperity shall come your way. If it's money you want, he'll give you. If it's a child you want, he'll fill your womb. If it's obodoyibo you want to go, the Lord shall grant you visa. She picks up the phone on the third ring, and Dr. Moody can hear the hum of her generator in the background. It's the hum of machinery, the song of engines, those loud creatures with insatiable appetites, the soundtrack of his childhood. What are you eating today? His mother says. He can imagine the small parlor that he spent afternoons playing in, the pictures on the stained walls, the bugs in the corner where the cat has left the remains of a lizard. He can see her sitting on the big red sofa and fanning herself with a day's newspaper. And he can see the smudges on her eyeglasses as she raises her head to the flickering light. RSVP, rice and stew, very plenty, Dr. Moody says with a small chuckle. I can't believe they have all those things in America, his mother says. Egusi, azo, even fresh ugu leaves. We have all that in Maryland where all the Nigerians are, Dr. Moody says. There's none of that here in New Mexico. I don't know why you would go to the middle of nowhere, his mother says. Was there nowhere else? But then again, I don't understand how things work over there. I'm just happy you're happy. Her voice is hoarse, strained like it gets when she has a cold. There is a silence, and Dr. Moody can feel his mother's ear pressed against the receiver, listening patiently to the sound of his breathing. But Dr. Moody does not tell his mother the truth of the weight that he carries but cannot share, the burden of being the only son to a stubborn mother and an iron father. Like many graduates of Caribbean medical schools in the United States, primary care is his only option. He's considered a second-rate doctor, one who could not quite cut it. And to add insult to injury, he did not even do well enough to match with the coveted residency spots in New York or Boston or LA. He has burned out before he has started. He is tired and unhappy, and he knows he will eventually break his mother's heart into a million pieces. He had cried himself to sleep his first week in Maryland. It was winter, and the snow was not as white as he had expected, but the wind was harsher than he had imagined. The house was 2 stories and made of brick. There were no pictures on the walls. His father was in the middle of a second divorce, and the 2 girls from that marriage, his half-sisters, were going to live down south in Virginia with their mother. So there was little in the house. There was little in the house, and even though a fire burned beneath the mantle, Dr. Moody had never been so cold in his life. Do you understand the opportunity you have been given? His father had said, standing in the doorway of his new room. The room was empty except for a narrow bed and a utilitarian desk. There were smudges on the walls where photos had once been, and Dr. Moody had wished that there was something in the room to stare at, to distract himself from the ugly sob that welled up in him, ready to burst forth. But his father was relentless. Do you know what it means to be an American? His father had said. Do you know what it means to hold a blue passport? Most boys would leap for joy and ask how they can be of use, not only for themselves, but also for those they have left back home. But here you are, crying like you one day have your own family and responsibilities of your own. I should not have left you with her for so long. She has made you soft, turned you into a mother's boy. But what was wrong with being a mother's boy, Dr. Moody had thought? She had given birth to him, had she not? She had been there when he first learned to talk, to walk, to crush hibiscus flowers into the sand and pretend he was preparing a grand feast for the governor, the president, foreign dignitaries with large abadas and even larger stomachs. She had thought it funny to play along with him when he cooked in the sand, to bring him discarded ingredients to mix over his fake fire, to sit with him when he fed his stick figure friends, to scold his father when he scoffed at the 2 of them, when he watched with eyes narrowed from the veranda, spitting his disgust into the dirt. Have you forgotten that you're raising a boy? His father would say years later, when he began to spend his afternoons in the kitchen, plucking feathers from chickens, pounding yams in the mortar while sitting on his mother's wine or duroku, a woman's stool. And his father's chagrin had not bothered him then. He was a father after all. What were fathers if not someone to shout and give commands? What were fathers if they did not look down on one thing or the other? The fact was that the kitchen made him happy. The swift rhythm of knives hacking away at chickens and vegetables and roots alike was as beautiful to him as any child's lullaby. And how could something that made him happy, something that set him on fire, be so wrong? In the morning, Dr. Moody is up earlier than usual. You need a wife, his mother had said to him before he hung up the phone. I want grandchildren of my own. He had lied to her. You have them soon enough. It's the first thing I'll do when I finish here. I'll come home and take a wife, any girl of your choosing. He knows his mother will not force a girl on him. She will let him choose and support him with whomever he chose, as long as she's of the right character, the giving character. She has to understand that doctors are very busy, his mother had said. She can't be too needy, as I hear American girls are. The right wife for you will come from home. She'll understand you in a way foreigners can't. She'll know what you mean without you having to say it. Dr. Moody did not remind his mother that he had not lived in Nigeria since he was 14 years old, that he was no longer a little boy, that even though she saw him every year when he visited her in Enugu, he had blossomed in ways she could not understand. It's a slow day. Dr. Moody begins his round with the mounting of paperwork. It's his least favorite thing about his work, the pedantic and tedious obsession with records. That's what happens when people can sue you for anything, his attending physician had said his first week on the job. Write every fucking thing down. If you think it's important, write it down. If you think it's not important, write it down. No need to worry about your handwriting. We've got computers now. In the middle of the brutal day, Dr. Moody finds himself face to face with a young girl with the darkest black hair he has ever seen. He's squatting down to eye level to speak to her when her mother, standing nearby, clears her throat and asks in a soft voice, "Your accent. Where are you from? Jamaica? Barbados?" He's accustomed to this question, usually unperturbed by the fact that his accent is quite often attributed to the Caribbean. But in his mood, he feels displaced. "Nigeria," he says to the woman more forcefully than he means to. Then a young girl in her child's voice asks, "Are you a prince?" The question takes him by surprise. He raises an eyebrow, and a small smile spreads across his face. He is no prince. His father is a retired engineer, and his mother a school teacher. No, I'm not a prince. I wish I was," he says to the girl with a smile. If he was a prince, the son of a Nigerian politician, for example, the type of people whose brazen display of wealth made his mother lose sleep, made her count the torn bills in her waist purse, he would certainly be somewhere else, some exotic locale, eating and making music, or whatever it was such people did. "You look like a prince," the young girl insists. Her legs are dangling from the bed. "Doesn't he, mommy?" she says, looking back to her mother, who nods slowly in agreement. "He has a prince's strong jaw," her mother says with a coy smile. And Dr. Moody is so flattered that a warmness spreads into his chest. When the little girl leaves waving, the mother pauses at the door for a brief moment, making lingering eye contact. Her black hair haphazard across her dark face, and says with a wink, "Maybe next time I'm here, I'll ask for the African prince." Later that evening, Dr. Moody tells his friends. They're standing in the parking lot. Dr. Moody, Dr. Khan, and a second-year resident named Dr. Doshi. Dr. Moody met Dr. Doshi a few weeks before Dr. Khan's one-bedroom apartment. He had thought Dr. Doshi handsome, charming even. He is tall and large, an Indian Paul Bunyan if there was ever one, muscular against Dr. Moody's own slender frame. Under the fading sunlight, Dr. Moody steals tentative glances at Dr. Doshi's soft face. Doshi has a thinker's eyes, sharp and alert, a talker's mouth, pointed and firm. His smile is mischievous, boyish, curled sideways, his brown eyes twinkling under bushy eyebrows. The trio are waiting for a shuttle to take them from one county hospital to another. Dr. Moody tells them that the Nigerian is always either a prince or a 419 scammer, never a teacher or a student or a father, a lonely doctor dying in the desert. It seems impossible for them to imagine him as anything but a noble or a thief. And I'm going to end it there. Thank you guys so much for joining. And I guess that's the story. It doesn't end there, but I thought it would be a good place to end.
Yeah, I wanted to invite everyone to unmute and give Kosiso a round of applause and a little hoot and a holler.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Hi, Mom.
So she's agreed to do a little Q&A session. We can take questions. You can just unmute and ask a question, or you can drop a question in the chat, and either way is fine. Oh, I have a question to start if everyone's shy.
I
Um,
think someone's.
oh,
Go ahead. I had one, but go right ahead.
oh no, you go. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that was beautiful, Kosiso. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
That was gorgeous. And I just wanted to know why you chose nonfiction to start writing initially, if that was your genre, or if you started writing something else, and just how you started.
How I started writing is the question. So like it's a long story, but like I'm almost here. So like anyway, so in college, I started college as like a bio major, and then I was like doing really badly in my chem class. And so my mom suggested, like, why don't you study English? And I was just like, okay, because I was always good in English. So I was like, okay, so I switched majors and I did English with an emphasis in creative writing at USC. And I just really just fell in love with it and fiction specifically. I guess I wrote a nonfiction piece recently that got nominated for a Pushcart Prize, but that was like a huge shock to me because I'm not a nonfiction writer. And so yeah, then my starting was like sort of like undergraduate work, but my mom's also a college professor who teaches English. So I think it kind of like was in the cards for me. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I was just going to say I related a little bit because my parents are doctors, but also my dad loves to write, and so I was feeling he does medical work in Kenya and has a lot of people that he's helped put through school who encounter a lot of those same problems, I imagine. So I was just hearing your words, and I love that your mom is a professor, that she supported you. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Hi,
Hi,
Jean.
Kosiso.
Hi.
My question is, hearing this story and knowing, like, I had read another story of yours that was published in Gulf Coast that I also loved, and also having been in a workshop with you and read part of your novel, a sense that you're drawn to male protagonists, or at least the stuff that I'm familiar with in your work. So I'm just curious, are you drawn to male protagonists? And like, I don't know. Like, I personally, as a writer, I find it hard to write male protagonists. That's just my own limitation. But I'm curious to hear your thought process.
Yeah, I think I was asked this question when I was at VSC actually. And like, and I think that like when you first start writing, I think a lot of like writers of color, for example, when they first start writing, they write like I had friends who would start writing like characters who are white when they're themselves are not white. So I feel like we have so many stories of like male figures, male, and like it just becomes something that like from the beginning you sort of know how to write. For me especially. So it's like it's not that I'm necessarily drawn because my story collection is like I've been exploring a lot more female characters, but I was interested in characters who are kind of um like you were kind of like I'm drawn to male characters and like characters in general who are outcasts in some way or who don't live up to sort of like I went through this phase when I was really interested in like exploring masculinity and like men who aren't really like your masculine ideal and like and I discovered that I don't have to write male characters in order to explore that. But I feel like these are some like my very first stories. So I feel like, and I was really interested in sort of like men who are not, like alphas or whatever. And I was really interested in kind of exploring how, like the whole idea that like the patriarchy hurts everyone, including men, kind of. But like, yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And you write them so beautifully with such wonderful interiority. So thanks.
Thank you.
Kosiso, when you were here at Vermont Studio Center, I think I misspoke. I think you were here in February.
Yeah, I was here in February.
Yeah, I think I said January. Apologies. I was wondering what you were working on while you were here, and if anything that you were working on here has gone through further revisions or drafts.
Yeah, so like I started working on it. So I started with this. This was like the very first, most of the stories I've written before this story that I just read were all set in Nigeria. So this is the very first story I wrote that was like set in America. And so it kind of inspired, and I was always been interested in sort of like Black people in the American West and sort of like the experience of like immigrants, Black immigrants, Black people, and outside of sort of like what we consider where like Black people are. And so I just kind of like started writing. I just decided to start working on a short story collection of like, I wrote so much at VSC. I wrote 8 stories. Yes, yes. I wrote 8 stories at VSC. I was on a roll. And they were all sort of like exploring, as I was saying to you earlier, sort of like this experience of immigration and sort of like, I'm interested in like immigrants who are kind of like not really like model minorities necessarily, who are kind of like challenging that. I use the term burnouts, but like I feel like that's kind of like a derogatory term. But it's kind of like I was kind of like interested in like people who are not these like, I came here with $2 in my pocket, now I'm a millionaire. You know, kind of people who are facing disappointment, who are facing kind of failure in a way, and sort of challenging those ideals of like the superhuman immigrant who overcomes everything and is now rich and has achieved the American dream. So I wanted to sort of like interrogate those sort of like ideas. So like the stories I've been working on, I have one who um, a spooky story, and she is about a girl who's sort of mourning her best friend, and she sort of like is graduated from college, but she doesn't have a job. She's like living on her boyfriend's couch, and she's just kind of like, she's dealing with this grief that no one else seems to understand. And then I have another story. It's about an artist who, you know, she lives in Orange County, California, and she is trying to be an artist, and she's living at home with her parents, and they're telling her like, don't date anyone because, you know, you live under our roof. So it's just kind of like exploration of that, I guess, those immigrants who aren't, who just like are human and like are kind of not, you know, the, are still worthy of our attention, even though they may not have some kind of big American, I came here and now I drive a Tesla and I'm rich, and everyone should learn from my personal story of triumph in the American landscape. If that makes any sense. So I wrote 8 stories, is what I'm trying to say. And like I've like, it's my turn to workshop my MFA program next week, and so I just submitted like one of the stories. And so I'm excited to like, I've been working on the like for like this last semester, I submitted 2 stories from that collection. This semester I'm going to submit 3, and so I'm like working on that right now.
Wow, I can't believe you wrote 8 stories when you were here.
Yeah.
That's really productive.
I was super productive. I was so cold. What to do?
Yeah, I remember not seeing you very much, like walking or like just like around campus, and I was like, oh, I hope she's okay.
I was frozen.
Do other people have questions? I love thinking about setting people of color in rural landscapes, because, you know, I'm a Korean adoptee and I live in rural Vermont, and I personally like really claim like loving nature and loving being outside in like the rural landscape, and I feel like that like POC characters end up being like framed in the city, like, you know, and I think that thinking about the rural, like POC and the rural landscape is interesting to me personally, and not something I read a lot about. So, yeah. And I love the like subverting the successful immigrant trope narrative too. Are there other questions for Kosiso?
I'll ask another if that's all right. Kosiso, I'm just curious. I love that line, boys who eat their meat first will learn to steal. That was so powerful and such a powerful cultural image as well. And I wonder, as you're writing, what comes first for you? Like, where did this character come from in your mind? Like, do you first envision the protagonist and then build the story around them? Or does it come from an experience that you've had? I'm just curious with this one in particular, like how you begin.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So this one, I started with place. And I was like, okay, I want to write a character who's sort of like in, I guess, the middle of nowhere, America. And then I started with that. And then I started with the feel. And then after that, after place, it's kind of like a feeling. If that makes any sense. I don't want to sound like, oh, new age, like started with a feeling. But I started with a feeling of like, and I was like on this role of like exploring these sort of male characters. And so I started with a place and I started with a feeling, like this feeling of like not living up to your potential. And then I was like, okay, let me start there. And I just kind of went from, it was like New Mexico. Okay, that sounds like, I don't want to say it sounds like a random place, but because I actually love New Mexico. I was doing a road trip from like DC to LA and I drove through New Mexico and I had like this aha moment. It was just like beautiful and sun-kissed and it was gorgeous. So like I was like, I want to write something that's set here because it's just so pretty. And then yeah, the story just kind of like came. It was one of those it's one of the easiest stories I've ever written. Like a lot, I feel like there's some stories that I write and then it's like I have to like go back and revise and go back. This one kind of just like came out and was like almost ready to go. Like I've done very like minimal revisions on this and I like submitted it to like stuff and it's gotten me into stuff. So, but I'm not saying like that's not the kind of writer I am. Like I just, whatever I write is amazing. In the first draft, I just send it off and get Pulitzers. But this story in particular was like, it just kind of came together in a very organic and like not stressful way.
Because for some of your other stories that don't have that like magic, like you're pulling something down onto the page, do you do a lot of research like about place or location if you're setting something in a place that you don't know very much about?
Yeah, I do some like research, but I tend to like, I guess, write what I know. I think that's like where I'm most confident as a writer. And I think that like, um, for me, I think the stories where I'm not like, usually like, 'cause I wrote the story about like this Nigerian American family that goes on vacation in the Grand Canyon. And I've never been to the Grand Canyon. So I did some research about like place to make it sound like I've been there. And then I wrote this other one about this family in Montana and I've never been in Montana. So I sort of like did a lot of research on like, and then I submitted to my MFA program and like someone told me that instead of deer, there's deer, but like it's most likely gonna run into an elk. So it's kind of those details that I'm really interested in when I'm doing my research. So those like kind of those little things. But most of the time I write, like most of my stories are either set in the US or set in Nigeria. And like I find that like the ones I write that in Nigeria are usually like, for me, I guess the easiest for me, because I just feel like Nigeria was it's such an interesting and such a dynamic place that like a lot of stuff that I write about the place might sound like it's fiction, but it's actually, I could just like write stuff that actually happened and people will be like, oh my God, this is so imaginative. And it's like, this legit happened, like it's true. So I think most of the research I do is around like place. But like I think most of the characters like I have are like characters that like talk to me or whatever, come to me and like I like can't stop thinking about them and I just write them down.
I know that you just started in your second semester of an MFA program, and you mentioned that you're reading 2 books a week, and I was wondering, which is a lot. I'm wondering what you read recently that you'd recommend, or that something that you read recently that you really enjoyed.
Okay, so like on Tuesday we had one story that was due, and we're for my friction workshop. We're reading contemporary Japanese literature and translation, and the story I read was Kokoro by Soseki. Can't remember his first name, and it was so good. It was like really, really like it's one of those like timeless pieces. And I haven't read a lot of Japanese literature, so it was like a great introduction to it. Um, Now we're reading Snow Country by Kawabata. And I'm also reading The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, John Le Carre, who just recently passed away. It's supposed to be like the greatest spy novel ever written. And so that's what I have to do this weekend, is to read those 2 books. I'm excited about them because I started reading them. I'm not waiting till last minute. It's not college. and um, and I started reading them and they're actually really good. So I'm like really excited to sort of explore the contemporary Japanese literature. I think Tokyo is like one of my favorite cities. I've only been once, but it was like I had an aha moment there too. Yeah.
Any other questions? I know that you're all. I'll ask one more question,
Keep going.
and then okay. I was wondering. I know that you're also teaching this semester, a creative writing class for undergraduates, right? Yeah. Have you found that that teaching informs your writing, or like, and what are you selecting to teach? Do you have the ability to craft the syllabus for your students? And what are you assigning? What are you excited about teaching?
That's a really good question. I think that like because I over winter break, I like did a bunch of PowerPoints and like came up with my lesson plans. And so I was reading like character and plot and like I'm also have to teach poetry. And so I was reading a lot of poetry. So I'm teaching like fiction and poetry. So I was reading a lot of poetry and like I just found that it's like when you teach stuff, you have to learn it to be able to teach it. So I found that I was like learning all these things that I just get putting into words things that I know intuitively, and then also learning like new things. So then like that has been like a really good part of teaching, is that you get to sort of like learn while you teach, which is like a really good and helpful. Like I did this story about I did this PowerPoint about character, and then it made me start thinking about like I was like, okay, put your character in unique places and give your character sidekicks and friends. And so it made me start thinking about sort of like how to expand my own stories and how to like apply what I'm teaching to my own stories. I'm really excited I'm going to teach ZZ Packer's Drinking Coffee Elsewhere, which is like literally one of my favorite short stories. So I'm like really looking forward to teaching that. I read for the first time James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues, and I was just like, oh my God, like I was kind of like it was out of this world experience just reading that story and be like, wow, this is such a great story. And then I'm teaching Omakase by Wei Wang, which is also a fantastic story. And I just really like the sort of like kind of like I think a lot of her stories have this kind of detachment that I really enjoy. So yeah, I'm teaching mostly short stories, and so I'm really excited to like. I love short stories. I'm really excited to like continue teaching those. Sorry, my phone's ringing. I'm gonna mute myself.
No, it's okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I just want to invite everyone to give Kosiso one more round of applause.
Awesome.
Great, thank you.
We're waiting for the book to come out.
That we can teach your stories.
Yeah.